If you have multiple triggers on a single game object, Unity doesn't really provide you with a built-in way to detect which trigger was actually triggered. So let's take a look at an easy and a good approach to this. We'll also make sure that it's reusable and can be used in any project. Let's say we want two triggers on a player, one for attack range and one for interaction range. Let's head into Unity and create a cube to act as our player. To keep things organized, we'll keep the triggers separate from the actual player by making them its children. Let's add the colliders on them and set the is_trigger to true. And now we can adjust the radius to however much we want. I'm gonna quickly add a rigid body to our player because that's a requirement for triggers. And I'm gonna disable the gravity and freeze the position and rotation. You can actually check the is kinematic if you want, but the current setup works for me pretty well. The next step is to add the player script. But before we do anything, I want to show how most of the developers might handle the trigger. I'm gonna add an OnTriggerEnter function, and it'll just display a log for now. If we test it out, we can see that our triggers work fine. But if we handle it this way, we currently have no way of determining which trigger is actually doing this. So instead of that, we're gonna move this to the child objects. Let's create a new C# script called custom_trigger and add the OnTriggerEnter function inside of it. Let's display a simple string and name of the object that this script is currently attached to. That way, we'll know which trigger is actually being triggered. Head back into Unity and let's attach this script to our children game objects. If you give it a try, it'll start working pretty nicely if you ignore the debug statement by the player class. Since we're making our custom trigger reusable, we don't just want to print out a line in the console. Instead, it'll just tell the parent that, hey, I'm this particular trigger and I've been triggered, and then the actual functionality can be handled by the parent class. We can easily do this with events. If you want to learn more about events, you can check out my video on them. Anyway, let's add two events, one for enter and one for exit. And in the OnTriggerEnter function, we can invoke the enter event, and in the OnTriggerExit function, we can invoke the exit event. And that's all we need to do. This class can now be used anywhere and can handle any trigger. Let's actually use it in our project for it to make sense. Back in the player class, we'll need the references to our two custom triggers, so let's quickly make the public field for those. And we'll need to handle our enter and exit functionality, so let's quickly make the functions for both the triggers. Now in the awake method, we can register our functions as listeners to these events. By the way, I'm using C# events here, and not Unity events. But if you wanted to use Unity events instead of C# ones, you could simply just change the type and remove the event keyword and register your listeners using the addListener method. Since I'm going to be using C# events, I'm just gonna undo all these changes. Anyway, let's add the listeners. So now you can see how we're handling different triggers in different functions. The attack triggers, enter and exit, is being handled by these two, and the interaction ones are being handled by these two. You might think that it's actually more hectic since we're just going to write more and more functions if you want to add more triggers, and while you do have to create more functions, you'll find out that this is actually cleaner than doing everything inside of a single function that handles all the triggers together, separated out by if conditions. If you keep doing that, it'll just jumble up the code. Let's head back into the editor and assign the references. Let's give it a try and see how it goes. You can see how we can now tell which trigger is actually being called, and we have separate function to handle that trigger separately. If we wanted to add something else here, we only just have to change the functionality of that particular function and not touch anything else. To make things even easier for you, I've actually gone ahead and created my own implementation of this custom trigger class, and that's available on GitHub. There's a link in the description down below, and you can use that one if you don't want to code out your own solution. That script supports both 2D and 3D and has an optional support to filter out tags inside of the editor. I might actually go ahead and add more things as time passes by, but for now that actually works pretty well. To recap everything, we created 2 child objects, added triggers to them, made a custom class that emits the custom event, and just used that event to handle our trigger logic so we can know which trigger was entered. If you like this video, be sure to like and subscribe and leave a comment down below on how I can improve my content.